All right. Well, we're going to start that right now. Intro song. We've got Temple phoning in right now. So, Temple Grandin, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, this is Discuss the Truth, Ian Trottier.
Hi, this is Temple Grandin.
Well, Temple, thank you for. Sorry, I've seen you trying to phone in. I was with a couple of other people I was interviewing. We had on Dr. Hall from Miami Beach and Miriam Henning from Los Angeles. Thank you for phoning in. I apologize for not answering, but this is the slotted time.
Yep, and this is what we're just going to do it on the phone. That's just fine.
Wonderful. Temple, for listeners, we are live with Winwood One right now. For listeners, would you please take a moment and introduce yourself if folks are not familiar with you?
Yeah, my name's Temple Grandin, and I am a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. I've also written a lot of stuff about thinking and using visual thinking to solve problems.
That's wonderful. Now, Temple, tell listeners, what is it that got you interested in the animal studies? And I think you study mostly cows, is that correct?
Cattle, and I've done some things with pigs. What got me interested was back when I was 15, I visited my aunt's ranch. And this brings up a really important thing for students, is how do students find out things they might be interested in? Well, I got exposed to the beef cattle industry when I was 15, when I visited my aunt's ranch, and that's one of the reasons I got interested in it. And students tend to get interested in things they get exposed to, or they might go, oh, I tried that and I don't like that at all.
Right. And so you, how old were you at that time with your aunt's ranch?
I was 15. And
whereabouts was this?
The ranch was down southeast Tucson in Elgin, Canelo, Arizona, up by Fort Huachuca. This would have been in the early 60s.
Now, Temple, you are on the what is referred to as the autism spectrum disorder.
Yep.
You have autism, is that correct?
That is correct. I had no speech until age 4.
Wow.
And one thing autism has done for me, it's made me an extreme visual thinker. And if you watch the HBO movie, Temple Grandin, it shows exactly how I think. Like the word shoe gets said, and I see a whole bunch of different actual shoes I'd either worn or were popular at that time that I'm thinking about it.
And all those images will enter your mind.
Yeah, that's right. And it ends with a high top sneaker.
Always
style.
That's interesting. And that's your preferred footwear.
Well, no. Right now, my preferred footwear is an Ariat boot, and I've got a bunch of those. I had to give a brand new pair of Ariats away because I thought it came out of the same shipping container, but it came out of another shipping container, and it was slightly different, and they hurt my feet. This is where shoes are not always
equal,
sized exactly.
Right. Now, tell listeners a little more about the Temple Grandin movie, HBO. The actress Claire Danes played you.
That's correct, and she became me. It shows visual thinking. It shows the projects I've designed. It also shows very nicely the excellent teachers that I worked with. My Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, and he got me interested in science, and then that gave me a reason to study. You know, studying wasn't just to study. I studied because it was a pathway to a goal.
And this was high school you're speaking, or?
This is high school I'm talking about, yes.
And did you consult with Claire? Obviously, you met with her and you had to tell her how you would think through various topics. Is that correct?
Well, what Claire, I talked probably even more to the director, Mick Jackson, and he totally understood how I think. And with the writer, Christopher Munger, and the producer, Emily Gerson-Sains, I did spend half a day with Claire, which she videotaped. And then I gave her old tapes from the late 80s, which she played over and over again, where she just sort of became me.
Now, tell listeners, why is it that you began, so pigs and cattle struck your interest as a 15-year-old?
Beef cattle, mainly.
And what was it about those two animals that interest you?
Well, if you read my book, Thinking in Pictures, when I got into adolescence extreme anxiety, and I watched beef cattle going in the squeeze chute to get their vaccinations, and I noticed it kind of relaxed them. So I went and tried it out. So that was one of the things that, started the interest. But I just can't emphasize enough, okay, now that kids are home with COVID, let's introduce them to tools. Let's introduce them to making art. Do some of the things that the schools have taken out that you can now do at home.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. You've also invented a box of some sort that helps children with autism feel.
I did. Yeah, the squeezing machine or the hug machine. Deep pressure is calming for some children and adults on the autism spectrum. It doesn't work on everybody.
Okay.
But weighted blankets actually now have gone mainstream.
Right.
I have a friend that has one. She's not autistic, and she likes to sit and watch TV with the weighted blanket because the pressure is calming.
That's right. So that's regardless on the human being. It's calming regardless of their mental state, I suppose. Be a way to say it.
Autism, half of Silicon Valley probably is on the autism spectrum. Your station wouldn't be operating without kind of the nerdy guy that keeps everything going. He's probably on the autism spectrum. Thomas Edison was probably on the autism spectrum. Einstein had no speech until age 3.
Really?
Yes, really. Where would Albert Einstein be today? He'd probably be in special ed.
Right. That's very interesting that you mentioned that, Temple. So currently there is a debate in with the vaccines, right?
I'm not even going to discuss that.
Okay, that's we've got a lot of listeners that go one side or the other, and
I can tell you right now, when they get a COVID vaccine, I'll be taking it.
Okay, yeah. Tell the listeners about what you're doing right now at Colorado State.
Well, right now, like most universities, we're still kind of locked down.
Okay.
So I've been doing a lot of writing. In fact, I'm working on a new book on visual thinking and how visual thinking can be really useful for solving problems. Because one of the things I observed in my work with engineering stuff with the meat industry is you've got those clever guys in the shop that invent the clever mechanical equipment. Then you've got the more mathematical engineers to do refrigeration and boilers. And we actually have a huge shortage of people in the high-end skilled trades to invent things for factories. And back in the 80s and the 90s, when I was working in construction, I worked with a couple of guys that had 20 patents each. And they would be definitely labeled autistic today. We need these people.
Right. So, what is a person that's autistic? What does that mean?
Basically, a brain can be more social emotional, or a brain can be more thinking. So you take out some social circuits, and then you have geek circuits to program all the computers that just took the, makes all the airplanes fly and rockets work and makes your phones work.
But you're a visual. You visualize things. Thinker.
There's actually 3 kinds of minds. There is the photorealistic visual thinker like me, or object visualizer. Then there's the more mathematical pattern thinker. That's going to be a computer programmer. That's called visual spatial. In fact, in my book on the autistic brain, I show the scientific research that shows that these 2 kinds of visual thinkers exist. Somebody who thinks like in photographs the way I do, and then some that think much more in patterns and like mathematics.
And when at what age did you realize that you learned by thinking in photos?
I thought everybody thought in photos when I was in my 20s. I thought everybody thought in pictures. And some of my very first animal behavior work, I noticed that the cattle would stop at a shadow or a reflection, and other people weren't noticing that, and I couldn't figure out why. And now I've figured out that a lot of people think more in words, and they simply just don't see it. Engineers that are mathematical calculate risk. I see risk. Okay, let's look at the whole Boeing Max mess with the angle of attack sensor, an extremely fragile device that senses air angle. And they wired just one of those directly to the flight controls. Oh, there's no way I would have trusted a single sensor that fragile. But the problem is that the mathematician calculates the risk. He doesn't see the risk of maybe a pigeon or some other bird ripping that sensor off of the airplane.
You're a genius in one way or another. It sounds like the way your brain operates is truly phenomenal.
Well, I see stuff like 2.5 years ago. I had a fabulous trip down to Cape Canaveral. I was just geeking out. I got to go in the vehicle assembly building. It was like so cool. And I got to visit a launch pad they were just finishing up, and I saw something in that launch pad that shouldn't be there. We were there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I watched a raccoon come out of the launch pad base and go down the steps off into the bushes. And I said, did you see that raccoon go down those steps? Nope. I said, you better check to see what he's been chewing. He'll chew anything that you've touched, a lot of tool handles. If you've touched a lot of wires inside one of the circuit boxes and the door is open, he would chew that. Nobody else saw the raccoon. Nobody else saw the raccoon. I saw it go down the stairs.
And so
out of the bottom of the launch pad.
And so was it inspected after you mentioned you noticed it?
I don't know. I left. I was just there doing a lecture. And I was doing a lecture on my diversity and disability awareness. But I told the project manager there that there was a raccoon in that launch pad base, and nobody else had noticed it.
Right. The phenomenal thing here is that you're bringing up an excellent point, that raccoon was doing something there. And so what was it chewing on? What was it eating?
It may have just been sleeping. But the thing, I know enough about animals to know that they will chew things that people have touched because it has salt on it. Now, Cape Canaveral is near the sea, so maybe this raccoon won't be quite so salt hungry.
Yeah. That's a good thought. Tell us about your family growing up. Now, I know your mother fought very hard for you. I've watched snippets of this movie that Claire Danes made, playing you, acting you, if you will. Your mother was very well educated as well. She had gone to Harvard, correct?
Well, she definitely did. In fact, she was one of Harvard's first non-traditional students to go back to school. Because when she had me, she only had about 2 years of her education done. And then when I was 14, she went back to school and just went right to the dean, talked to them, and talked her way into doing that. And she has a Harvard bachelor's in English that she got as a non-traditional student back before there were such things as non-traditional students going back to school. And she went to really good doctors, got me into speech therapy. The other thing, Mother always encouraged the things I was good at. I was good at art, and she always encouraged that.
And do you still practice your art?
Well, the art I practiced in doing my design drawings. And then as I drew things, I can see the facility in my mind. In fact, I was just talking to my assistant right now. We're having to design some concrete work and figure out the slopes. And we were just figuring out, well, if we wash these pens with a hose, how can we make the drain so it will drain when you wash the pen?
And is that for cattle or pigs or both?
It was for cattle.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, America has a fascination with hamburgers. Do you consume as a diet?
I eat hamburgers. Yep, I consume animal protein, and there's been a lot of improvements. I've worked hard on improving handling, and one of the things that really got a lot of things to improve about 20 years ago was when big customers such as McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's insist on standards and inspect plants. And they did that with both animal welfare and with food safety. And I worked on the implementing the animal welfare program, and I developed a very simple way to evaluate a plant. It's sort of like what are the most important things for traffic? Well, you'd want to be monitoring speeding and monitoring running stop signs and red lights, and of course drunk driving. Well, I did a similar really simple scoring system for meat plants, and they had to make certain numbers, very, very simple guidelines, and it worked. When big customers insist on things being done right, it can really make a difference.
And what would be the best way for cattle to be raised in that sense for consumption purposes, meat for beef?
Well, all beef cattle, whether they're going to a store like Whole Foods or whether or some other specialized grass-fed or whatever, the cows and the bulls live out on a pasture, and they always have. Whether it doesn't matter where the meat ends up going. The cows and bulls live on the pasture. Then the calves spend the first half of their life on pasture. for regular beef, and then they rest of their life in a feed yard.
And
And
do you,
then now if they're all grass fed, they wouldn't be in a feed yard. But the thing a lot of people don't realize is that for beef, all of the bulls and cows live on pasture.
And do you design those pastures?
Well, I've designed cattle handling facilities when they have to, bring the cattle in to vaccinate them. My main thing worked on is design the cattle handling facilities. And if you're interested in cattle handling facilities, I have a book, Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals. I have a website, grandin.com, just my last name, .com. I've also written some textbooks on animal handling.
And Temple, for listeners parents that may be out there saying, "Hey, my child has autism or lies on that spectrum," what advice would you have for a parent that has a child with autism?
All right, let's just start with real little kids. If you have a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, or a 4-year-old who's not talking, the worst thing you can do is nothing. You need to be working with that kid now. Don't wait 2 years to get a diagnosis. You already know something's wrong. He's not talking, he's rocking, he's not interacting with people. So the first thing you'd want to do with these little kids, especially if you're somewhere where you can't get services, is spend a lot of time with this kid playing games with them. Little turn-taking games. Let's say he likes to line up toy cars. Well, then we're going to take turns lining up the toy cars. Then you start teaching him words. The worst thing you can do with little kids that are not talking is to just put them in front of electronics all day. That's what you don't do. Now, the problem with autism is once the kids get a little older, it varies from Silicon Valley a computer specialist, and people in Silicon Valley tend to avoid the labels, to somebody who never learns to dress themselves, and it's all got the same word. Now, there's some things that are kind of universal. Multitasking can be really hard. Also, people on the spectrum don't remember long strings of verbal information. And then another problem you might have is your kid might be terrified of loud noises, like the vacuum cleaner or the hairdryer. And one of the ways to help them get over that is let the kid control the vacuum cleaner, where they get to turn it on and off. And then that thing they don't like, because it's too loud, might go from being the worst thing in the world to the thing they like when they can control it. That's really important.
So that's great thinking, but there's also the child may have varying degrees of.
This is the problem. Autism comes all the way from slightly nerdy, where I'm sure there's lots of engineers working in TV and radio stations that are slightly nerdy. There's no black and white dividing line between autism and non-autism, or slightly nerdy and autism. It's a true continuous trait.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. And the problem is now it's so broad that I see situations I don't like I might see a 12-year-old kid who ought to be in an advanced math class, and he's in with kids that are nonverbal. There's some great things you can find online for kids that are, math kids. I just looked up the programming for the Dragon capsule, for the displays and all the programming. It's JavaScript. It's it's all Linux open source software. It's stuff that when kids are home, they can learn it. They can learn how to program that. JavaScript, Android, Chrome browser, and then C++ and C programming. That's what makes that spaceship work. Wouldn't that be a fun thing for a kid that's home all summer to learn how to program that? That is available online. I think that's so cool. I totally geeked out on the launch. I was glued to an iPad for the entire launch until they safely got in orbit.
Yeah, that was great. And they've been there now for over a week, I believe, right?
Well, they're going to be up there for a while. And then parents say, what do I do with my kids? And we're going to be locked up all summer now. And what I found helped me is I got to get up in the morning, have breakfast, have a shower, and be dressed for work by 8 o'clock. Get on a schedule. And now I'm spending this time to do a lot of writing. It would be a good time to do gardening or learn how to program the Dragon spaceship. The educational materials for that are available. Another great math site is Wolfram Mathematica. Maybe learn how to use tools. We got kids today that are not learning how to use tools. Maybe that'd be a good time to learn how to build things out of wood. Introduce tools. If a kid likes Legos, I was using hammer, screwdriver, and pliers by second grade, and I was taught how to use them safely.
Right. Right. So, for a parent, what are certain things that they can look for? So the child has autism, but just because they have autism doesn't mean that they're going to learn or advance in learning in one area than another. Of course.
Well, what tends to happen with autism is you tend to have uneven skills. You're going to have the art kids, more like me. We're going to be the ones that are going to be art, or we're going to be really clever mechanical kind of engineering stuff or skilled trades. Then you got your mathematicians. They're going to be your physicists, your programmers, and then you've got the word minds, where they think completely in words. And one study showed that people that go into psychology tend to be word thinkers. And what tends to happen when a kid's got a label like dyslexia or something like that, uneven skills, really good at one thing, really terrible in something else. As a visual thinker, I absolutely can't do algebra. It doesn't make any sense to me. And the only way I got through college is, thank goodness, back in 1967, algebra was not required.
But you probably advanced in geometry.
Never got to take geometry because they kept pounding away on algebra. And what should have been done is advancing straight to geometry.
Right. Tell us about your time at Arizona State. What was it? That was where you earned your master's.
That's where I got my master's. And one of the reasons I went there is I was in Eastern originally, and that's where my aunt's ranch was. About a 3-hour drive from Arizona State. So that's one of the reasons why I went there.
And what were some of the
Arizona from 1970 to 1980. I lived 10 years in Arizona, and that's where I started my career. And being a woman in a man's industry was a much bigger barrier than autism ever was.
Oh, wow. Fascinating. Interesting.
Much bigger barrier.
Expand on that a little bit.
Well, there's a scene in the HBO movie where they put bull testicles on my vehicle. That actually happened.
Wow.
And where I had the most problem was with the foreman level of management, the middle managers. That's where I had almost all my trouble. It was not the big owners of the feed yards. Most of them were actually quite nice to me. And then a really good contractor had seen some of my drawings, and he seeked me out to work with him, and he built a lot of my projects back in the 70s.
So maybe the middle management was somewhat intimidated by your intelligence.
Middle management was where I had the trouble.
Yeah, and what was setting you apart? That your ability to design these.
Well, I was good at designing, and a lot of people that are socially awkward have trouble with interviews. My way I did an interview is I just laid the drawings out on the table, and I let the work sell itself. I'd show the articles I'd written for trade magazines and my pictures, just lay the work out there. Or if a person is a computer programmer, show off the app you made for a phone, show off some of your code. You don't put a whole book full of stuff out there. What you want to do is give them a 30-second wow. That's how I sold the jobs when I started out, one little project at a time.
A 30-second wow. I think that's a phrase worth coining.
No, I think, but you see, the mistake people make is they put too much stuff in their portfolio and then they let it get shabby. I made that mistake. No, you got to have a crisp, freshly printed drawing. Or if you're using a tablet, it better be charged, and don't have weird stickers on the cover. Get a new cover that's plain and put it on your iPad.
Now, what kind of drawings are you talking about? Sorry, Tim. What kind of drawings are you talking about?
Architectural drawings of cattle handling facilities, mechanical drafting of facilities for handling cattle. That's what I'm talking about.
Temple,
if you want to see some of the drawings, you can go on Google Images and just write in Temple Grandin drawings or Temple Grandin blueprints, and you can see some of my drawings.
Okay. Do you have? Thank you. Do you have students that you teach?
Yes, I have a class I teach every year, and one of the things I have the students do in my livestock handling class is do a scale drawing. And I'm finding now in the last 5 years that we've got students that have never used a ruler. And they'll ask me, why would it be important to make a scale drawing? And I realize some of you may not need to design a corral system, but maybe you might want to remodel your house. And that's where knowing how to make a scale drawing would be a useful skill to have. We've got kids today growing up totally separated from the world of the practical.
That's unbelievable. And not using a ruler.
No, I'm serious. And we of course, we got shut down for COVID. They shut the university down on March 13th, and I haven't traveled since. All the speaking engagements have been canceled, and we had to get our classes online. And I had 54 students in my class, and I had 2 students that did not have a ruler in the house when we were on lockdown.
Huh. Do you have students that are also autistic?
No, I have some graduate students right now. I have had students in my class that were autistic, and they did really well.
And of course, they had gotten themselves to a position to enter the college and the university.
Yes, and I've had several students that are autistic, and they did well in my class. I made sure I helped them, and I've got 4 graduate students right now that are definitely not autistic, and things for research right now, it's a real problem. Fortunately, when they shut everything down, 2 of my students had just finished a project. So now we're spending the time this summer working on writing because we can't do much else.
Mm-hmm. If you were to change one thing in American education, and that's broad, so let's narrow it down to public education. I don't know what your education was in high school or not, but if you were to change one thing, the reason I ask this is because I find it alarming that you had 2 students that had never even used a ruler or didn't have a ruler in their house. What would you do to improve the American education system?
I'm going to put the hands-on classes back in the schools. That's going to be cooking, sewing, art, woodworking, auto shop, welding, drawing, theater, all of the hands-on things, because these are things that can turn into good careers. But I've been to schools where in one high school you could learn algebra, English, and sports, and that's about all you could learn in that school. And that was a place I visited probably 4 or 5 years ago. And we have a gigantic shortage right now of high-end skilled trades. And there's stuff that we don't know how to build anymore. And it's a class of engineering I call the clever engineering department. You might take a really clever mechanical devices. I just had my copier break the other day. Mm-hmm. The paper feed doesn't work. Is one tiny part that's busted that probably can't be replaced, and the whole copier is going to have to be thrown out. A lot of little fragile parts inside it. But that paper feed mechanism was very clever how it was made. But the mathematical engineer doesn't design that. Now, making a cheap plastic, that's the financial people. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. making the parts difficult. I could try to look up parts for some rollers inside this copier online, and they don't seem to sell these things. We're now living where we just throw this stuff away, which is right. Terrible.
Yeah.
I actually know what's wrong with it. I took the thing apart, and it's one stupid little tiny white roller that in the paper feed and turns on a metal shaft, and it's gotten worn where it turns on the metal shaft so it doesn't turn straight. It makes mm-hmm. the paper jam.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Little tiny part.
But that'll lead you to buy a whole new machine, you're thinking.
Well, then I had a monitor. This makes me mad too, because I had this monitor that started flickering, and I looked it up on YouTube, and I know the power supply was breaking.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Well, that's a part I probably could have bought, but then that could have been fixed. But it was, then I'd have to order the part, figure out, try to find the part.
Right.
But but I know exactly what was wrong with that. But I'd have to track down the part, and the other problem is I need the copier.
Sure. Right.
It's but it's like it made me it was very clever how it's made inside. I actually took the whole paper feed thing apart, and but very cheaply constructed inside.
Uh-huh.
I would have liked to have seen that made out of heavier materials, and then it wouldn't have been breaking.
Could you use a camera?
What do you mean, use a camera?
Well, to make the photo, depending on how many copies you need to make. If it's just a couple of copies, perhaps you use a camera.
Well, that's what I did. I had a paper that I actually had a rough draft of a paper that I'm still an old fogey that writes by hand when I do my serious writing. I actually photographed that paper because I was afraid to get lost. I actually did that, but I do need to get the copier fixed.
So I think yeah, go ahead, Ken.
You see, the point I'm trying to make is you got two parts of engineering. You've got the clever engineering department, like the paper feed and the copier, or a packaging machine for food processing. And we're not making certain food processing equipment. I visited a chicken processing plant last year, and all of the specialized equipment came from Holland.
Okay.
Well, because they kept skilled trades. I'll tell you what else Holland has got.
Interesting.
The number one best machine for making integrated chips to go inside comes from Holland.
Interesting.
And it goes back to they've kept the skilled trades. I call it the clever engineering department. We still have the mathematical engineering department, but you need us clever engineers. We're the ones that are going to see the raccoon inside the launch pad.
Right.
That's important.
Right. And what does American lack? Why have they, or why has America, the American education, why have they taken out these hands-on classes?
I think those kind of classes are expensive, and I said one of the things we need to be resurrecting is there's a lot of retired mechanics, retired artists. I mean, we can start resurrecting some of the stuff in people's garages, and then of course we got the liability issue. We're going to have to deal with that, but we're losing out on. You see, a lot of people that are kind of autistic are the ones that do things. When I worked in construction, I worked with construction for 25 years.
Wow.
And I'm going to estimate that 20% of the really skilled welders, skilled machinery designers, only had the title of draftsman. They should have had a bigger title than that, were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And I am saying that seriously. And one of these two guys I worked with had 20 patents each. And they were just as autistic as they could be, and they made very clever machinery. I can't tell you exactly what it is because I can't identify them.
Mm-hmm.
They're undiagnosed people with autism, but they're people, they're my generation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell us about, we've heard about your mother. She sounds like an incredibly amazing woman. What about your father? What kind of influence did he have in your upbringing, Temple?
Well, he didn't have so much of an influence. And my mother has a book people might want to read. It's called A Thorn in My Pocket, and I'm not the thorn. That's a Robert Frost poem. And then you learn all about that. But Mother was the one that was the important mentor. She had a very good sense of how to stretch me. You know, there's protect autistic kids, and I'm seeing too many smart kids. They might be getting straight A's in high school, and they've never gone shopping. They aren't learning to work. They aren't learning basic skills.
Okay. Yeah. Well said. And I think you personify the ability that someone that may have autism is able to achieve. You've got yourself a PhD.
There's I think Einstein had no speech till age 3. Thomas Edison was really different. What would happen to Michelangelo today? Michelangelo was a 6th grade dropout.
Wow.
And he stopped school at 12. His dad wanted him to be a kind of a legal person, learn Latin and write legal documents. And his dad hated art.
Oh, too bad.
And what would happen to him today?
Yeah, we wouldn't have his.
Ask these questions.
Yeah, right. We wouldn't have his beautiful statues. That's for sure.
Exactly. You see, that's the thing.
Or the drawings, right? Sistine Chapel.
Well, he grew up in an environment where that art was taking place all around him, and then he got apprenticed into it. And the education stopped at age 12. They didn't call it a 6th grade dropout. It's very well documented, but it was age 12, which would be 6th grade here, in our system.
Yeah. Yeah. Temple, tell us about Colorado State. What took you there? What was specific about that program that you wanted to contribute to?
I knew some people in Colorado State. It was also close to there's a lot of cattle stuff going. I had got my Ph.D. out of the University of Illinois. And I liked the West. I wanted to get back to the West. And Colorado State had an excellent animal science program. They also had some people I knew there. And I just called them up. And then I started working for them part-time.
And what was that thesis that what was your, at the University of Illinois? What was the
At the
top, what was it?
University of Illinois, I did a thesis on environmental enrichment for pigs and its effect on dendritic growth in the brain. That's what my thesis was on. And I've discussed that in one of my books, Animals Make Us Human. Whole first chapter I discussed what I learned in my thesis. And sometimes projects don't always come out the way the hypothesis is. My advisor wasn't too happy about that. But it was a pig project. But I wanted to get back to the West. And Colorado State,
Yeah.
I knew some people there.
Yeah. Hey.
So I had a good program, and so that's how I ended up here, and I've been in Colorado now for 30 years.
Oh, wow. My goodness. Are there any similarities that you can draw between the way a pig thinks and the way a cattle thinks?
Well, cattle are much more followers, much more of a herd animal than pigs are. Pigs out in the wild live in smaller groups. Cattle are, some of the behaviors are the same, but cattle's a grazing animal. There's a lot more of a tendency to follow the leader than pigs would have.
Okay, that's wonderful, because I think both are grayed out. A lot of people are keeping pigs as pets now, right? Aren't they?
Yep, for pig meat, the small pigs. Yeah, and even those get quite big.
What would you change about the cattle industry right now in the United States, or even globally?
One of my concerns with animals, and I also am going to put this concern on dogs and pets too, is what I call biological overload, where we push an animal's biology. Like, for example, the bulldog. They've selected so much for extreme traits that this animal has trouble breathing, trouble walking, and it can't birth naturally. Now, that was done for appearance trait. Now, you take a production animal like the dairy cow, for example, breeder just for milk, then we start to have problems with reproduction. Or you're breeding cattle just for more and more meat, and they've started to have problems with heart failure. It's pushing the animal too hard, either with genetic selection or maybe too much grain in the feed. But one of my big concerns is the genetics, because something like the bulldog is completely genetics. And that's what I call bad becoming normal. Because if you go on to Google Images and you look up bulldog's dilemma, they use that keyword on Google Image, you'll find a picture from the 1938 New York Times where the bulldog actually has a snout, he's got some legs, and how did it change into something that's got so many problems today? Well, that's what I call bad becoming normal. It changed slowly over time, and people don't realize it.
I'm very
concerned about where genetics is going, and this has all been done with natural breeding. All with natural breeding. No genetic GMOs here.
Talk about the influence of the internet in regards to how, as human beings, we're now thinking and how our brains are being evolved. What is, in your view, is this a good thing? Are there downsides?
People are not differentiating between good information on the internet and junk. And there's so much good information on the internet.
Yeah.
And one of the things I have my students do, because I want them to learn how to use scientific databases, is they pick out any subject in animal behavior that interests them. But I want it narrow enough to force them to dig into databases. You have Google Scholar, you've got Science Direct, you've got PubMed, you've got Web of Science, and learn how to use these databases and look up the scientific articles on any subject that interests them.
Peer review.
And what I have found when I do this assignment, about 1/3 of the students, these are undergraduate students, already know how to use databases. And there's 1/3 where they don't have a clue. And they're learning something really important here.
Mm-hmm.
And then and where they're amazed at what they can learn from these databases. And I want them to pick out something that really interests them. It has to be animal behavior, because it is an animal behavior class. But I mean, if they're interested in the behavior of bees, that's fine. But I want them to pick me 2 journal articles off of the different databases to answer a question they might have about animal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure that before they graduate in college, they know how to use scientific databases.
Brilliant. Wonderful. At Temple, as we wind down the last few moments here, I'd like listeners. What can listeners expect from you moving forward? A new book that you're writing.
Well, I'm working on a book right now because I have not. We're still pretty well locked down right now,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be on visual thinking. Why is visual thinking important? I'm concerned about losing these skills.
Yep.
And education, I think, has been kind of taken over by the verbal thinkers. And when you think about something verbally, you tend to overgeneralize. And I find this happens all the time when I do a seminar on animal behavior or I do a seminar on autism. People will ask very vague, generalized questions. Oh, I'm a teacher. How do I handle autistic kids in the classroom? Or my dog is crazy. What can I do about it? And they expect me to answer that. I have to have a lot more information about the dog before I could tell you why he's crazy. Is he crazy happy? Crazy biting? I don't have enough information. And visual thinking is much more specific in thinking of then I ask a bunch of questions so I can make a picture. Well, the dog's either happy or snarling, but I have to know.
Right.
And visual thinking is important. And the first step that people have to know is that different kinds of thinking exist. And once you realize that, then you can start to see where these skills can complement each other. I've had students that have been highly verbal thinkers. They're good at all the things I'm bad at. Some of my books have co-writers because I need the verbal thinker for the organization. When it comes to engineering, we're training the students how to do the more abstract engineering. But what we're not training students to do is the clever engineering department. And what the latest research has shown is a person who's really good with the object visualization, which would be me, is going to be terrible at the more mathematical kind of visualization.
Right.
Person really good at the mathematical visualization is not going to see the raccoon or see a pigeon busting off the angle of attack sensor. It's the different kinds of minds there. You need to have both.
And is there too much emphasis on the mathematical equations, perhaps?
Yeah, there's too much emphasis, and I see engineering professors that have these students have better visual spatial skills, which would be the mathematics. What I'm saying is you've got to have both, because the people I worked with, which I'd call clever engineering department, all the people I worked with, we never touched boilers and refrigeration. We don't understand that stuff. That's for the more mathematical engineering, and we've got those skills. But we're losing the skills for the very, clever mechanical kind of things, fixing things. I'm very concerned about the loss of skills. And right now, Holland has got the premier chip-making machine of the entire world. And I actually saw a picture of it, and it's a complicated mechanical device. And some visual thinkers probably were involved in that along with the mathematicians. You see, the different minds can complement each other.
Correct. Right.
They complement each other because, like, to build a whole food factory, you need to have both kinds of engineers.
I want to say a word, and I'd like you to tell listeners what comes to your what's the first thing that comes to your mind, and it's a current event happening across really the globe now. Again, protests. What comes to your mind when I mention that word?
I'm seeing all the pictures from the various news stations and things like that. That's what I see.
Yeah. Temple, some closing thoughts for listeners. Something for listeners to go away with. We thank you for joining the program. Some closing thoughts for listeners.
Well, let's develop kids' strengths. The kids, let's get a lot of hands-on things in giving kids more opportunity to find out what they might be good at. I want to see, especially kids that think differently, get out there and be everything that they can be. It's what I want to see. And I think a lot of kids today are not getting exposed to enough different things to figure out what they might want to do for a career.
Very well said. Beautiful. Dr. Temple Grandin, ladies and gentlemen. Temple, thank you very much for joining Discussions of Truth. We look forward to inviting you back on the program.
Well, thank you very, very much for having me.
Okay, and there's that intro music coming in. So, what a wonderful treat it was to receive Temple onto the program. She didn't speak much about her father, but her mother had incredible influences on her. in her life, and certainly in so much that her achievements spawned the production of Temple Grandin, the movie, played by actress Claire Danes. She teaches courses on livestock behavior and facility design at CSU, Colorado State, and consults with livestock industry on facility design, livestock handling, and animal welfare. She's appeared on TV shows such as 2020, 48 Hours, CNN, and Larry King, Primetime, 60 Minutes, and Today's Show. Includes broadcasts throughout the world. Temple Grandin, Dr. Temple Grandin. She was inducted, by the way, into the Women's Hall of Fame in 2017. In 2018, she was made a fellow by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So whether you are a child growing, you're a student, whatever level, you're a parent, and regardless if you you have autism in your life, it's part of your life, whether you have it or your friend has it or family member has it, coworker, whatever it may be. Temple is an incredible example of overcoming challenges, regardless of whatever your challenge may be, folks. Overcome it, work hard, stay focused, and folks, until next week. By the way, I will be hosting next week, based in Hong Kong, author of Professor Everywhere. This is his current book, Nick Binge. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence. And the second hour will be former Secret Service uniformed division officer under Bill Clinton. Gary J. Byrne will be joining the program. I'll be closing out this month with author William Arkin, American Coup, How a Terrified Government is Destroying the Constitution. So what a wonderful way to end this day with Dr. Temple Grandin. And again, folks, regardless of your challenge, you can overcome it, keep fighting, work at it, and until next time, folks, be awesome.